The wind had a way of whispering through Thornfield Hollow, like it carried secrets too heavy for any man to hold. Tucked between the red rock canyons and the dusty reaches of Arizona Territory, the Cartwright Ranch sat quiet, proud, and just a mite too clean for comfort. Folks in town said it was the sort of place where every nail was hammered with purpose, and no dust dared settle without permission. And at the heart of it all was her, Maribelle. Most just called her the Maid. She moved quiet through the rooms, barefoot on polished wood, a wisp of a woman with hair black as a coal vein and eyes the color of rain-soaked soil. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it came soft and polite, like a hymn in an empty church. To the Cartwrights, she was little more than a shadow, there when needed, invisible when not. But to Eli McGraw, the new ranch hand, she was something else entirely. Eli had been drifting for near 6 years, ever since his pa got himself shot outside a saloon in Tombstone. He wasn't looking for roots, just a dry place to lay his head and a job that didn't end with a gun barrel. When old man Cartwright hired him on for fence mending and mule doctoring, he didn't figure he'd be here long. Least, not until he saw her. First time was on the porch, dusk stretching long shadows across the floorboards. She was scrubbing a copper pot, hands raw from lye and water, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She didn't look up, not even when Eli tipped his hat. He watched her from a distance, never spoke more than a howdy or a morning. But every time she passed, something stirred in his chest, like the wind changing direction. There was a stillness to her, like she'd seen too much and said too little. One day, while hauling firewood to the back kitchen, Eli caught her in the garden, hands deep in the soil, sleeves stained with clay and flower petals. He stopped, not wanting to startle her, but she spoke first. "You don't need to hover like a hawk, mister," she said without looking up. Eli grinned, scratched the back of his neck. "Ain't hovering. Just appreciating good work." She glanced at him then, just a flicker, but it hit like thunder. "Work's work. Appreciation don't pay wages." That was the longest sentence she'd spoken to him, and it stuck. The days wore on, and Eli started noticing things. How she never sat at the staff table, always eating alone in the pantry. How she flinched at loud voices, and how Mrs. Cartwright watched her like a hen watches a fox. And then there were the nights. Some evenings, when the moon hung low and the wind carried the scent of mesquite and old memories, Eli would wake to the soft creak of floorboards. He'd rise, peek out from the bunkhouse window, and see her walking into the hills behind the ranch, barefoot and wrapped in a thin shawl. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Told himself a man gets in trouble sticking his nose where it don't belong. But trouble's a curious thing. It don't wait for permission. And one night, when curiosity won out over good sense, Eli followed her. He stayed back, careful and quiet, stepping where her feet had pressed soft into the dust. The moon lit the trail, and after near half an hour, he saw where she was heading. A shack long forgotten by time, nestled under a cliff ledge. Ivy and sagebrush clung to the walls, and the roof sagged like a tired old man. She slipped inside, carrying a lantern and a basket. Eli waited, counted to 50, then crept closer. What he saw through that crack in the wood made his blood run cold. There, sitting at the table inside, was a boy no older than 10, eyes wild and bright. Maribelle knelt beside him, humming a lullaby soft as feathers, hand running through his tangled hair. "Shoo," she whispered. "Ain't nobody gonna take you from me." Eli stepped back, heart pounding. She wasn't just a maid, and she wasn't alone. Eli didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bunk with the blanket drawn up to his chin, eyes fixed on the rafters, while the wind whispered through the chinks in the wall. What he'd seen out there, Maribelle and that boy, it gnawed at his thoughts like a coyote at a bone. Come morning, he told himself to let it be. Ain't his place, he reasoned. A woman's past ain't none of his concern, and maybe she had her reasons. But as he watched her move through the house, carry in that same calm grace, wearing that same expressionless face, he knew he'd never look at her the same again. Later that day, he found himself walking the ridge above the shack, hidden by brush. Sure enough, there was the boy again, playing with a carved wooden horse, barefoot and wild-haired, Logan, like the weight of the world hadn't ever touched him. He looked like her. Same eyes, same nose. But no one in town knew she had kin, least not Eli. At supper, he caught her alone near the pump. "Why didn't you tell no one?" he asked, quiet, voice just above the wind. Maribelle didn't flinch, didn't look surprised, he knew. She just kept pumping water, her jaw tight. "Tell who?" "You think the Cartwrights would have kept me on if they knew." "Is he yours?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. She looked at him then, straight through him, like she was weighing his soul. "He's all I've got." Eli nodded slow. "Ain't a skin to meddle. Just, I can help." "You can't," she said. "You don't know what I'm running from." Eli almost asked, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't fear. It was steel. That woman had survived something, and she wasn't about to let go of her one piece of hope. But the ranch ain't a place for secrets. Old man Cartwright was sharp for his age. Mean, too. He had eyes everywhere, and he didn't like surprises. That evening, while Eli was mending a saddle, he heard the foreman Sam Odell muttering to a wrangler about footprints in the back pasture. Small ones, fresh after the last rain. "Cartwright's gonna want answers," Sam said. "Ain't no room for strays out here." Eli's got twisted. The noose was drawing tight, and it wouldn't take much for suspicion to land square on Maribelle. That night, Eli made his way to the shack again, this time not to spy, but to warn her. She opened the door before he knocked. "They're watching," he said. "Tracks by the pasture. Ain't gonna take long for them to figure it out." Maribelle stepped aside, let him in. The boy was asleep on a pile of old quilts, thumb tucked under his chin. "I can move him," she whispered. "I've done it before. Just need a day or two." "Where would you go?" Eli asked. "Anywhere they ain't looking. I've been hiding him since he was born." Eli ran a hand through his hair. "Why's he need hiding? Who's after him?" She hesitated, the weight of years catching up to her all at once. "His father." Eli stiffened. "And who might that be?" Maribelle's voice dropped to a whisper, bitter as frost. "Sheriff Alvin Crow. And if he finds out, he'll take him. Or worse." Now, that was a name Eli knew too well. Crow wasn't just the law. He was the kind of man who wore justice like a badge, but dealt cruelty with both hands. The idea of that boy at his hands made Eli's fists clench. "You stay put," Eli said. "Don't move him yet. I'll see what I can do." Maribelle looked at him, uncertain. "Why are you helping me?" Eli's answer came slow, but sure. "'Cause no child deserves to live in fear. And because you ain't just a maid. You're a mother. That changes everything." He left her there, heart heavy, knowing he'd just stepped into a storm that had been brewing a long while. One thing was certain, Sheriff Crow wasn't a man to cross. But sometimes, a man's got to pick a side. The next morning, Eli made his way into town, saddle creaking beneath him as Dusty, the ranch mule that passed for a horse, clomped steady down the road. The town of Leeville wasn't much more than a few false front shops, a saloon that stank of old whiskey and sweat, and the jailhouse that loomed like a wolf among sheep. Sheriff Alvin Crow stood on the porch of that jail, whittling a stick with the slow patience of a man who liked taking his time with pain. He was tall and lean, with a mustache waxed to a point and boots that shined too bright for a place that lived in dirt. Folks said he came from Georgia, a failed colonel who brought his old war grudges west when the South fell. He wore his badge like a crown and carried 2 guns, one for show and one for killing. Eli tipped his hat as he passed. "Sheriff." Crow didn't smile, just nodded and said, "Mornin', McGraw. Cartwright's got you running errands now." "Just fetching supplies." "Well, be sure to fetch quick. I don't like drifters lingering." Eli rode on, jaw tight. Inside the general store, he picked up flour, nails, and a tin of coffee. But before he left, he asked Mr. Brindle behind the counter, "You ever hear tell of a woman who worked for the sheriff? Maybe 6, 7 years back." Brindle scratched his neck. "You mean that girl, what was her name?" "Mira, no." "Mari? She up and vanished after Crow's missus died. Folks figured he ran her off." "Why?" "No reason," Eli said, but his thoughts were already miles away. He rode out of town before noon, and made straight for the ridge behind Cartwright's ranch. From there, he could see the shack, a dark smudge against the canyon wall. Maribelle was hanging laundry on a line stretched between two junipers, her motion slow, like she was weighing each breath. Eli waited till the sun dipped low and the ranch quieted before sneaking down. Inside the shack, he found her at the stove stirring a thin stew, the boy sleeping in the corner. "I asked about you," he said without preamble. Maribelle didn't look surprised. "What did you hear?" "That you disappeared after the sheriff's wife passed. Folks say you was close to her. She was the only one who ever treated me decent. When she got sick, I nursed her. Crow, he didn't like that. Said I was making her weak. Said she should have died quiet, not clinging." Eli felt heat rise in his chest. "And after she passed," Maribelle continued, "he turned to me, took what he wanted, and when I told him I was carrying, he said if I ever breathed a word, he'd bury me where no one would ever find the bones." She turned then, meeting Eli's eyes. "So I ran." They stood in silence, the weight of her words settling thick in the air. "He ever come looking?" Eli asked. "Not till now," she said, her voice tight. "I saw him near the ridge last week, just watching." "He knows." Eli's jaw clenched. "Then we need a plan. You gonna fight the law, Cowboy?" Eli stepped closer, voice low. "If the law's wrong, then yeah, I reckon I am." She looked at him long and hard, then nodded once. "Then we better be ready, 'cause men like Crow don't knock, they break down doors." The next days passed like a storm brewing, just beyond the horizon, quiet on the surface, but the air was tight with something unsaid. On the ranch, Eli worked double time, fixing fences, patching roofs, all while watching every rider that passed too slow. Cartwright barked orders like nothing was wrong, but even he felt the change. Men get mean when secrets stir the wind. One night, as the sky bruised with stormlight, Sam Odell rode in fast, had askew and a bullet graze on his shoulder. "They found the shack," he said, sliding from his horse with a grunt. "Cartwright's boys were hunting mustangs past the canyon and saw smoke. Crow ain't said nothing yet, but he knows. He's riding out come morning. Said he wants a look himself." Eli cursed under his breath, something fierce and silent. He waited till the ranch bunkhouse turned quiet, then made for the shack under cover of night. Maribelle met him at the door, already dressed in her old trail coat, the boy bundled and sleeping in a sack sling across her chest. "He's coming," Eli said. "I know. I got ears. We can ride for the Navajo lands. I got a friend near Fort Defiance. We'll be ghosts by sunrise." Maribelle shook her head. "You don't understand. Crow don't let things go. Not people, not pride. If I run, he'll burn the land behind me. He'll come for you, too." Eli set his jaw. Then maybe it's time he found someone that don't run. They left that night, heading south through the scrub hills. The stars were bright, but the road was cruel. The boy whimpered once, then quieted. Eli kept his Colt loaded and his eyes sharper than barbed wire. By morning, they'd reached a dry wash where Eli's friend Jasper kept a safe camp. Jasper was half Apache, half Luck, and all grit. "She told you about Crow?" Jasper asked, hand resting on a shotgun as he studied the child. "She did." "And you believe her?" Eli nodded. "With my whole damn soul." Jasper grunted. "Then you better listen close. Crow's got reach. Judges, riders, bounty men. But he's got pride too. That's his weak spot." Eli leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, if you want this to end, you don't run. You bring him to you. And you show him what it's like to face someone who ain't afraid no more." That night, under a lantern's glow, Eli wrote a letter. Signed it with his name, plain and proud. "Sheriff Crow. You want her. You come to me. Bring your badge, your pride, your guns. I'll be waiting at Dead Man's Bluff. E. McGraw." Maribelle watched him seal it, her eyes full of every fear she'd buried since the boy was born. "You're gonna die," she said. "Maybe," Eli said, "but not on my knees." Dead Man's Bluff sat west of the old river fork, a jagged ledge overlooking a canyon carved by centuries of wind and regret. Folks said it got its name from a gambler who thought he could outdraw a U.S. Marshal. Turns out, the bluff kept the bullet that found him, and the stain never washed away. Eli stood at the edge that next dusk, the boy safe with Jasper's people back in the valley. Maribelle wanted to come, but Eli shook his head. "This ain't your burden no more," he told her. "Let me carry it the rest of the way." She pressed a small cross into his palm. "Then carry it with this." The sun hung low, bathing the world in a red, so deep it looked like the canyon was bleeding. Just before full dark, hooves pounded the earth. Sheriff Crow rode in with 3 men, deputies, or maybe just gun hands in borrowed tin stars. They looked hard, but Crow looked colder. He wore his Sunday coat, and it looked like he was already writing Eli's eulogy. "Well," Crow said, dismounting, "you got some gall, McGraw." "Just enough to stand where you won't," Eli replied, steady. Crow's hand hovered near his belt. "Give me the woman. I'll pretend this little show of yours never happened." "She's not yours," Eli said, stepping forward, slow and deliberate. "Never was. And neither is that boy." Crow's face didn't change, but his fingers twitched. "You think this ends with you standing here like some dime novel hero?" "No," Eli said. "I think it ends with you telling the truth." Then he pulled out the letter, another one Jasper had dug up, signed by the sheriff's own hand. A letter off Aaron, hush money to a girl named Maribelle just months after his wife died. It had been buried deep in the records at the land office, hidden under a false name, but Jasper had a gift for digging up sins. Eli tossed it at Crow's boots. "You gonna shoot me now? Or confess you ain't fit to wear that badge?" Crow looked at the paper, then back at Eli. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then a shot rang out. Eli dropped to one knee, gun already up, but it wasn't him who fired. One of Crow's own men, the youngest of the bunch, lowered his rifle. "I didn't sign up to murder no man over his honor," the kid said, voice shaken. Crow's face turned to thunder. He reached for his pistol. Eli fired first. One clean shot, right through the shoulder. Crow hit the ground hard, his badge fallen from his coat like it knew the weight of guilt. Eli walked over, took the badge, and tossed it into the canyon. "This bluff don't need another dead man," he said, "but it sure don't need no liar standing on it neither." Crow's men didn't stop him, and for the first time in years, the wind over Dead Man's Bluff carried something other than silence. The town of Leeville changed after that night on the bluff. Not quick, not loud, but like spring melting through a hard winter. Slow, reluctant. Sure, Sheriff Crow lived, though the doc said he'd never use his right arm again. That badge never found its way back to his chest. Word was, he packed up 2 weeks later and boarded a stage east, mumbling about land deeds in Carolina. Folks didn't wave him off. Eli didn't see him go. He was back at the shack helping Maribelle pack what little she had. "You sure you want to leave now?" she asked one morning, wrapping a thin quilt around her boy. "Town's quiet. Folks don't look at me like they used to." Eli nodded, watching dust drift in the morning light. "They ain't looking at you different. They're looking at themselves different. That don't mean they won't forget." She studied his face, the lines that hadn't been there before, the set of his jaw a little tighter than it used to be. "And you?" "I'm done fighting shadows," he said. "I'm thinking maybe it's time I learn what peace feels like." They rode out together that day, Eli, Maribelle, and the boy she now called Caleb. They didn't head for any town in particular, just followed the ridge south, where the hills met the river and the trees grew tall enough to hide a new beginning. Jasper gave them 2 mules, a bag of supplies, and a map with an X marked near a place called Hollow Rock. "Ain't much there," he'd said, "but it's honest, and folks don't ask questions they don't want to answer." On the second night, they camped near a bend in the river. Caleb snored quiet under a wool blanket while the fire crackled low. Maribelle leaned close, her voice barely a breath. "I ain't never thanked you proper," she said. Eli didn't answer right away. He stared at the flames like they held the next part of his life. "You don't owe me thanks," he finally said. "I didn't do it for that." She smiled faintly. "Then why?" He turned, eyes softer than she'd ever seen him. "'Cause when I looked at you, I saw someone worth fighting for, someone I might follow if she ever asked. She didn't say nothing, but she didn't look away neither. Just rested her hand on his, light, steady. And for the first time in either of their lives, the night didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to believe in. Hollow Rock weren't much to look at. 1 street wide, 2 lanterns deep, and the church steeple leaned just enough to make a man nervous. But it was quiet, clean. Folks minded their own and waved with one hand while the other stayed near the hip, just in case. Eli, Maribelle, and Caleb arrived in the soft light of dawn, their wagon creaking, slow past shuttered storefronts, and a rooster that crowed like he'd been woken too early. The general storekeeper, a wiry man with eyes like crows, watched them park by the well. "New blood," he said flat. "You set in or passin'?" Eli climbed down. "Looking for land. Heard tell there's a spread east of here what ain't been claimed since the widow Langford passed." The man spit near his boot. "Langford place, huh? Got a well, 3 walls, and ghosts." "Ghosts don't scare us," Maribelle said, stepping down behind Eli, her voice strong and steady. The man gave her a second look. Didn't say a word. Just nodded slow. "You want it. It's yours. Just don't blame me when the wind talks back." They rode out that afternoon. The Langford place sat nestled in a stand of cottonwoods near a creek that sang like a lullaby. The roof was mostly there, and the fields lay fallow, but the bones of the land were good, real good. By nightfall, they had a fire in the hearth, and Caleb curled up in a corner with a wooden horse Eli had carved on the trail. Maribelle unpacked flour and beans, humming soft under her breath. "Some old tune her mother used to sing," she said. Eli stood on the porch, eyes sweeping the stars. "Feels like a start," she said, joining him. He nodded. "Still a long road ahead." "Maybe," she said, "but we're walking it together." And that would have been a fine end to their journey. But the West don't care much for tidy endings. A week later, just as they finished hammering the last plank on the porch, a rider appeared on the horizon. Not fast, not urgent, but sure, confident, like he'd followed their trail all the way from somewhere mean. The rider dismounted slow, a letter in hand. Wore a marshal's star dull with dust. "You Eli McGraw?" he asked. Eli stepped forward. "Who's the skin?" "Marshal Dixon. I come on behalf of Judge Robert Finch out of Yavapai County. There's an inquest open. Sheriff Crow's file. Claims of violence. Missing evidence. You were named." Eli's jaw clenched. "You here to take me?" The marshal shook his head. "No, sir. I'm here to ask if you'll testify." Maribelle stepped closer, hand on Caleb's shoulder. Eli looked from her to the marshal, then out across the field they'd just started to plant. "Reckon I thought we were done with that chapter," he said. "You might be," the marshal replied, "but the law ain't." Eli looked at Maribelle, who nodded once. "We'll ride together," she said, "like always." Yavapai County Courthouse sat like a stone sentinel over the town of Prescott. Tall columns and iron lanterns flickering, like it was holding back the dark with pure grit. Eli hadn't seen the inside of a courtroom since his pa got into it with a cattle rustler in '78. He'd been 12 then. This time, he walked in under his own name and on his own terms. Marshal Dixon met them at the station. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. Eli looked at Maribelle and Caleb, who waited by the wagon, calm as prairie grass in summer. "I'm sure." Inside, the courtroom smelled of varnish and stale sweat. Judge Finch was a lean man with a hawk's nose and a voice like a cracked bell. The place was half full, mostly press, lawmen, and folks with nothing better to do than watch another man reckon with the truth. Crow wasn't there. He was holed up somewhere back east, licking his wounds and playing victim. But his lies? They lingered like smoke in a closed room. Eli took the stand, hat in hand, eyes steady. He told them everything, from the moment he saw Maribelle in the kitchen to the night on Dead Man's Bluff. He showed the letter Crow had written, the offer of silence, signed in a moment of panic. He told them about the threats, the bribes, and how the law had looked away while a woman and her child were hunted like coyotes. The court listened, and when Maribelle stood to speak, the room went so quiet you could hear the wind outside scratching at the shutters. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She just told the truth, the kind that's sharp and clear and hurts to hear. By the time she finished, even the most stone-faced bailiff had turned his eyes to the floor. The judge didn't wait long. "In light of the testimony," he said, voice rough, "the court finds Sheriff Alvin Crow guilty of misconduct, coercion, and criminal abuse of office. The matter is passed to federal hands." The gavel came down like thunder. Outside, the sky cracked open with the first rain Prescott had seen in weeks. Eli stood on the courthouse steps, feeling the water soak his hat brim and trail down his cheeks like the world itself had sighed in relief. Maribelle joined him, umbrella in hand. "That it?" she asked. Eli looked down the long road stretching back west. "No, ma'am," he said. "That's just the start." Back in Hollow Rock, the air smelled different, cleaner, freer. Rain had settled the dust and turned the earth soft enough to plant. Maribelle stood barefoot in the field, skirt pinned up, her hands deep in the dirt, showing Caleb how to set bean seeds in the furrows. Eli watched from the porch, whittling a toy horse from a scrap of pine. Life was simpler now, but it wasn't easy. The land was stubborn, the fence lines kept fouling, and sometimes Maribelle would wake in the night with a gasp, like her dreams were still trapped in that sheriff's house back in Leeville. Eli knew that feeling. His own demons still whispered from time to time, usually around dusk when the wind picked up and the shadows stretched long. But they were building something. Each morning started with strong coffee and a quiet look between them. No words, just a shared promise. "We're still here." Word came by mail one day. A land deed. Judge Finch had pulled some strings, granted them full title to the Langford place. "Consider it compensation," the letter said, "and a small bit of justice." Eli held the paper like it might crumble in his hands. He showed it to Maribelle that night under the stars. She read it, quiet and slow, then looked up at him. "You ever think we'd have a place that was really ours?" Eli shook his head. "Didn't think folks like us got that kind of luck." Maribelle smiled. "Maybe it ain't luck. Maybe it's earned. But peace has a way of stirring trouble when you least expect it." Late one evening, a wagon rolled up the road, one of the big ones with canvas stretched tight and wheels groaning like they were carrying too much weight. Eli stepped down from the porch, rifle close, eyes squinting against the lantern light. A woman climbed down, tall, dressed like she'd ridden half the country and back, with a face that looked carved from weather and grit. She carried herself like she owned her name and didn't mind if it scared people. "You McGraw?" she asked. "I am," Eli said. "Name's Lorna Gage," she said, reaching into her coat. "I'm looking for a woman named Maribelle. I think she might be my sister." Eli's breath caught. He turned to the cabin. Maribelle stood in the doorway, frozen, eyes wide. Lorna took a step forward. "Mari." The silence that followed stretched long, full of history neither of them had spoken in years. Then Maribelle whispered, "Lorna?" And the past, well, it walked right up and knocked on the front door. Lorna Gage didn't waste time with pleasantries. The next morning, she sat at the kitchen table with her coat still on, and her eyes scanning everything like she was memorizing it, just in case it vanished. Maribelle poured her a cup of coffee without speaking. Eli leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I thought you were dead," Maribelle finally said. "I was. In every way that mattered," Lorna replied. "They took me to St. Joseph's orphanage after the fire. Said you died in childbirth. I ran the first chance I got." Maribelle's voice cracked. "Mama didn't die from a fire. She died from grief. I was sent to work in a kitchen before I turned 12. They sat quiet a spell. Then Lorna said, "You got a boy, and a man who don't flinch when you look at him. That's more than most." Eli cleared his throat. "How'd you find her?" "Old bounty poster," Lorna said. "Saw her face in a marshal's office down in Bisbee. Wanted for questioning," it said. "I knew that jawline, knew those eyes. Took me 3 months and half my pride, but I tracked her here." "You ain't here to drag her back, are you?" Eli asked. "No," Lorna said, setting her cup down. "I'm here to start over, if she'll have me." Later that week, they held a harvest dinner. Jasper came up from the valley with his wife and a fiddle, and even the general store man brought a jar of peach preserves. The table was covered in biscuits, salt pork, pickled beans, and laughter. Caleb sat between Eli and Maribelle, his feet swinging under the bench, eyes wide at the music. As the stars came out, Eli stepped away, leaning against the fence rail. Maribelle joined him, her shawl drawn tight. "He's happy," she said. "He's got every right to be." "And us?" she asked. Eli looked at her, his eyes full of dust and daylight. "I ain't ever known peace till you walked into that saloon with a mop in one hand and a storm in the other." She laughed, low and quiet. "I didn't know I had any storms left." Eli took her hand. "You've got whole skies still inside you." They stood that way as the music played, the fire crackled, and the wind carried the scent of sweet grass and new beginnings. The West don't give much, but sometimes, when you fight hard enough and love deeper still, it gives you a place to belong. And that, friend, is more than most get.